And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will this new mobile grocery app provide my elderly mother with the independence from her family she craves? And can my ignorant cousin stop thinking ivermectin is going to somehow cure his COVID and also his flaming hot gonorrhea? And now, the podcast host who orders his fast food chicken sandwich with the authority of a SEAL Team drill sergeant, Pete Dominic.
That is right. You nailed me again, Pete Co. It's like you're here with me all of the time, telling folks all of my secret picadillos. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Stand Up with Pete Dominic. I'm very... well, it's morning time. I usually do this at night, and last night I spontaneously went into New York City, which I haven't done in a while, to see a few friends who I haven't seen in a while. And so I didn't get it done last night, and no news segment today, which I do Monday through Thursday, but I didn't get to it today. But I do have two amazing guests joining me. Comedian and writer, Emmy Award winner Laurie Kilmartin is joining me. And for the first time ever, the great Tom Nichols, who is a writer, an academic, and I guess he fashions himself a never Trump conservative. He became one of my favorite commentators over the Trump years, and he has like 500,000 followers on Twitter for good reason. He's got two great books recently that he has written that are really important, although he's written several others. But I talked to him today about his new book, Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy, as well as The Death of Expertise, the campaign against established knowledge and why it matters. So many of you have suggested I get him on, and so I'm very happy that I did. We had an awesome conversation. So I'm sorry that I don't have an opening news segment today, but I really think you're going to love both of these conversations. Tom Nichols and Laurie Kilmartin coming up. Want to tell you, tonight is our weekly hangout. We do it every Thursday. If you are a stand-up paid subscriber, then you are invited. You should be getting an email every day. If you are, there will be a link in there. If you're not a paid subscriber, what the hell is wrong with you? What are you waiting for? Go right now and sign up. Standupwithpete.com, standupwithpete.com, or patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just go to the show notes. There's a place that you can easily click and sign up now. I hope to see you guys tonight at 8 Eastern, virtually. It's always great Thursday nights, and very much looking forward to that. Also on today's show, I do have an ad that happens during my first interview here with Tom Nichols, so I don't want you to be shocked about that, and don't be upset with me, or don't do this too often, but I do love this company, ZocDoc, and I'm very excited to tell you about it. So that's all I have to say here at the top. Laurie Kilmartin coming up. But first, I've got Tom Nichols finally joining me. He is on Twitter at Radio Free Tom, at Radio Free Tom. It's his first time on the show. So please tell him you heard him here after you're done listening to this. And I think you're going to really like this. So much to talk about with this guy. A fascinating conversation. He was also on Jeopardy like 5 times, like a Jeopardy champion. So I started there with him. We had a great conversation. Really cool guy. I think he enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. And so here we go, contributing writer to The Atlantic and USA Today, and academic at so many different places. I'm very happy to have him joining me for the first time. The audio quality, I think, is great, except he's sometimes drops out. He's like moving away from the microphone. It wasn't anything I could do about that. I'm sorry, but I think it only happens a little bit. Hopefully it's not too annoying. Other than that, it's a great quality. And as always, let me know if you hear any technical issues. I can sometimes fix them for other folks and for the future. I'm constantly getting better at editing here and doing more editing of the actual interviews, things you don't know behind the scenes. So if there's any ever problem, just let me know, and let's stop talking and throw to my conversation with Tom Nichols right now. All right. Well, many of you have asked me to get our next guest on the show, and I've ignored him because he just seems like such a big deal. And I was like, you know what? I don't have his email. I don't know him. I never interviewed him. and I didn't want to have to go through the rigmarole. I went through the rigmarole. I got him. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Nichols, the Tom Nichols is here. Although, Tom, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me. But it made me think there's probably a ton of people named Tom Nichols.
There's a few of us. It's a pretty common name, and we're all awesome.
Are you annoyed with, do you get the question all the time, and are you annoyed with it? And can we just move past the question about Jeopardy? You were on the show many times, more than Tom Hanks is on Saturday Night Live. You're a champion. Do you weigh in on the scandal about the host thing? Do people ask you, and do you give a shit?
Yeah, no, I kind of don't, because, once Alex is gone, it's just not going to be the same. But no, the only time I weighed in and I took a lot of static about the show is I actually didn't like the James, the Vegas guy who came in and kind of beat the board. I'm like, I think the way I put it was, that's about as exciting as going to the gaming room at Caesars and watching a professional bet on the horses. The whole point of Jeopardy is supposed to be kind of amateur. It's supposed to be the mailman or a local teacher. So it's not supposed to be a Sharpie from Vegas saying, I've run an algorithm and I know where all the daily doubles are. And I thought that was kind of boring. The only other thing I'll say that pisses me off when people ask me about Jeopardy, I'll get introduced, right? And they'll say, Tom Nichols, PhD, worked in the Senate, author of multiple books, Russian ex blah, 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 blah. And everybody sits there and they kind of nod. And then they say, and a 5-time Jeopardy champion. And everybody goes, yeah, now that's impressive. It's like nothing you ever do in your life will be as impressive as having been on Jeopardy. It just shows you that we're like a media culture, that you're not smart until you're official. I actually had a student, I was teaching at Dartmouth, and he walks up to me after I'd been on the show and he says, Professor Nichols, I had no idea you were so smart.
Well,
like my eyes water, and I'm like, dude, I'm your professor. He's like, yeah, but you know what I mean.
That is leads us to your work, really. I mean, you weigh in on this and many different ways, and both your most recent books are phenomenal and so important for everybody to read and to get. But one of the things that you talk about is that you're not good. You're not worthy of living. You should have no life force unless you're awesome, unless you're doing important work, unless you're making your mark and leaving your legacy, then life is not worth living. That's a very American cultural idea. Take it from there, if you don't mind.
And it has really obsessed us. And I think it's become, excuse me, it's a generational thing, because the older guys that I grew up around, I grew up in a working class neighborhood, factory town, high school my parents were high school dropouts. Most of the older men I knew had not finished high school. They'd all served in World War II or Korea. And the idea that, a hero was a guy just got up and did the job every day, right? You got up, you went to a job, you didn't much care for it. My dad slogged it out for 33 years as a blue collar and gray collar worker at a big chemical plant. Now you have to be Tony Stark. You have to be Thor. You have to be you have to wake up every morning and say, I'm going to smash the international pedophile conspiracy to, poison our precious bodily fluids. And I think in both of the books, but especially in the one about democracy, our own worst enemy, this narcissism and grandiosity has made us really incapable of participating in a democracy. Because being in a democracy means just being an ordinary, normal voter who thinks about normal voter stuff. And people just are not, that's too boring. That's too ordinary. It doesn't make life interesting enough to do that.
Why do you hate superheroes, particularly the Avengers? What happened to you?
It's really funny you say this, because I am like the most immature guy in the world. I'm 60 years old, and I have my, Fallout 4 bobblehead and all my video game stuff. And I have one of these glittery computers that I can play games on. I love those movies. All I'm saying is this shouldn't be your model for living your life day to day. And so, although I have to say I grew up, I might be more of a DC Universe Superman guy than I was with Marvel, although I was a big Iron Man reader back in the day.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I hadn't heard you talk about that. And I was like, man, Tom Nichols really has got a blind spot for graphic novels and superheroes. And
I take deep exception to this. I was a Watchmen. I read Watchmen when it came out. I read, I was Frank Miller. I was a Frank Miller fan on the Dark Knight stuff. So
is it true that when you were young, the reason you didn't read Black Panther is because you thought that Black Panther was teaching CRT in schools?
No, the reason I didn't read Black Panther when I was young is because when I was young, comic books were made on stone tablets, and Black Panther didn't exist yet. I caught remember, I started reading comics right at the tail of the Silver Age. So I was like still trying to figure out how the old Flash became the new Flash sometime in the 70s.
So I want to ask you a million questions, Tom, and we can go down a whole bunch of different ways. But I think that you can take this next question into the relevancy of why expertise matters. I thought it was really fascinating. I love reading your tweets that somehow put nuance into even Twitter. But there's a controversy over the Chairman of Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, usurping civilian authority when Trump was still president by, contacting his Chinese counterparts or whoever else, by talking to his own people and say, you don't do anything without first asking me. And so even some on the left are saying this is treasonous. This is wrong. There's a reason we have civilian, the leadership. And you basically weighed in on Twitter. It was like, nobody knows what they're talking. Why don't you ask somebody who knows what they're talking about, specifically when it comes to, say, the chain of command and nuclear codes? You actually are that guy. So why is that a nothing burger to you?
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of not even humble brag. I'll just brag and say, people say, well, you've written a couple of books. No, I've written 7 books. The ones before this were about things like nuclear command and control. If Milley had said, sorry?
I'll just read so you don't have to brag. Just you tell me if this is true or false, your Wikipedia. Tom Nichols taught international relations as well as Soviet and Russian affairs at Dartmouth and Georgetown. He was also a fellow in the International Security Program at Harvard. Nichols was the chairman of the National Security Affairs at the U.S. Naval War College, where he also held the Forrest Sherman, whoever that is, chair of public diplomacy. Nichols is the former secretary of the Navy, also fellow in International Security Program project on managing the atom at the Harvard Kennedy School. I'm not even done. So if all that's true, you wrote also a book titled No Use Nuclear Weapons and U.S. National Security. So I bragged for you if all that's true. You are the guy to ask this question.
Insufferable guy with that resume. But if Milley had said, the way you phrased it, Pete, was if Milley said, ask me before you do anything. He was careful not to do that. He said, remember, I'm part of the process. And he's not. The chairman has no operational authority on anything. What I suspect he was saying is, you have to keep me in the loop and tell me what's going on, no matter what anybody says to you. And he was walking the edge there, no doubt about it. The calls to the Chinese counterpart, that was all briefed out to the State Department and the intelligence community, and he'd actually talked about it with his previous Secretary of Defense. That, to me, that's a non-starter. That whole business of calling is China. If you're getting a warning that the head of the Chinese armed forces is getting a little rattled about how unstable your country is, calling him as his counterpart and peer within the military is actually the completely appropriate thing to do. The place I got a little jumpy is when he said, I'm part of the procedure. He's not part of the procedure. The problem in America is nobody's part of the procedure. The President of the United States can launch nuclear weapons and not ask anybody for a by your leave. And what Milley was doing, I suspect, from the way it was reported by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa, was saying, if you get any weird orders, tell me, inform me. And I actually think that was the right thing to do. Back in '74, when Richard Nixon, was drinking rather heavily, the Secretary of Defense actually went even a step further than that, and he said, no orders get filled unless they get checked by me or the Secretary of State. That was flatly unconstitutional.
Who's that?
Saying you have to tell me stuff and inform me is on the edge. Saying no orders go through until they come through me instead of the president, that's over the line. And that actually happened in
I'm trying to play trivia. I'm no Tom Nichols, and I'm going to embarrass myself. Was that Robert McNamara? No.
No, James Schlesinger.
All right, I'll edit that out. So I will. I like to make an ass of myself. That's part of the show. So your new book, Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within Modern Democracy. Tom, this must have been fun to write, but super important for us all to read. This is such an important book where you challenge all kinds of current paradigms in our country. And I mean, I don't know. Why did you write this? How about that?
No, because I don't get enough hate mail as it is. When you say, was it fun to write? It really was not pleasant to write. And my poor wife and some of my real close friends who I gave shout outs to in the preface, they'd spend long hours on the phone with me while I kind of walked through this, because I was really blocked here for a while. Because I kept saying, am I really saying this? Am I really coming to this conclusion? One of the things you do when you try to write something in at least a kind of scholarly mode, the book's published by Oxford, you really try hard to prove the other guy's argument. You sort of take all the hardest arguments against you and you say, I'm now going to prove why I'm wrong. And I kept coming back to, I can't make that case. I keep coming back to the place where I think I'm starting. And that was really hard to do. I mean, I come from that background. It was really hard for me to turn to people from my own world, from my own background, and say, we're the problem. You're the problem. Stop blaming globalization. Stop blaming Facebook. I mean, all of those are real problems that have caused real issues. Globalization, Facebook, Twitter, guilty. But my approach in the book was stop blaming everybody else. Start looking inside yourself and say, am I being a good citizen? Am I being a good person? The founders really believed that to have a good society, you had to have a virtuous nation. And I'm really concerned that we are just not, a virtuous nation that way anymore. And there's a whole chapter about it. I'm really concerned that we're narcissistic and selfish and affluent and spoiled. And I'm not sure we can sustain a democracy on that.
Not everybody is that. I agree with what you're saying here, but if I were
you and I are okay. Everybody else kind of sucks.
I mean, you're doing way better than I am, though. So let's speak. I mean, you have all these powerful degrees. I mean, you probably have no concern. I see you with the pictures of. Is it your daughter going to college? I mean, you're not worried about whether or not you can be able to afford that. I have an above ground pool, sir.
Yeah, I don't have a pool. Of course, I live near a beach, so
of course, I live on an island.
Yes, I technically do live on an island, but of course, I'm part of the problem on the other end, and I had to think about this. Yes, I'm now one of the educated elites, right? I'm a upper middle class. I have more degrees than a thermometer. Yada yada yada. Are we part of the problem? The educated elites part of the problem, and I think that. The answer I come to is, we're all part of the problem because we've become so tribal. I think that the main threat to democracy in the United States is residing heavily on the right. It's in my former party, the Republicans, that I left years ago. But it's not just in the United States. If you look at places like Italy, where they elected a comedian, if you look at Ukraine, where they elected a comedian, if you look at the United States, where we elected a reality star. If you look at the UK, where they elected a complete clown, in Johnson. I mean, the populist clownacy epidemic has been spreading. Brazil, Turkey, Poland, Hungary, the UK. I mean, it is a global problem. And I think it's actually, back in 1985, Neil Postman writes this book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, right? And I think that's where we are. Democracy won all the big fights after 1991. We live the longest, healthiest lives. Even the poorest among us are living longer and healthier. We don't face any kind of globe-spanning conflict anymore. And I think we just lost our sense of seriousness about governing ourselves. And we've gone, you know what? So, Bojo's a clown and Trump's a moron and Erdogan's an authoritarian. What's on TV?
Well said. Really, really well said. But what do you say to the poor whites who aren't doing that well, because, actually, let's try to do this too. Let's do what's everything that's wrong with media. It's me versus Tom Nichols. You're talking about your new book, and I have no right even being on the screen with you, but they know I'm good on TV, so they book me and put me on your level, which does an injustice to your entire career. Here we go. What you just heard Tom Nichols say is all good and well, but I can minimize this down to you in 3 words. Racism, religion, and capitalism. Okay, let's go to break.
Well, the book is a critique of capitalism because, and I love it when I get stuff calling me a leftist, because I'm 60 years old, and for 55, for 40 of my adult life, I was called a rightist and a Nazi, and, and even worse, a Reagan voter, which in America is, the ultimate insult now. But we consumerized everything. Everything's for sale. We've made a permanent youth culture. We consumerized everything. We created a culture where we all have to have a ton of luxuries, cheap. We want a lot of stuff. We want it cheap. We want it now. I had this argument about 30 years ago. I was hanging out with a couple of guys in my hometown. One of them was a union official, and the other was a small business owner. And they were bitching about how we don't make TVs in America anymore. And I said, you won't pay for a TV made in America. You don't want to pay your neighbor to make a TV in, Worcester. You're not going to pay that to operate a factory in the snow. And the answer was, well, those big companies should just take less money. And I said, okay, so like running a pizza shop, you should just take less money for your pizzas because people like pizza and they want to have more pizza. All of a sudden I was like, whoa, now wait a minute. Let's not talk crazy. And that's what we've become, right? That we say, I want cheap TV, I want a cheap computer, I want a really great car, and I want it to be cheap. But when I do something, I want to be paid top dollar. Now, you brought up poor whites and religion. The really interesting thing, Pete, look in the United States and around the world, the movement against democracy is not really being led by the very poorest people in every country. Being led by the middle class. It's a bored, affluent middle class that is looking for a big thing to do. If you look at the January 6th rioters, for example, there were a couple of guys at the University of Chicago went through all the arrest records. These were all like middle class. They're like accountants and dentists. They weren't like people that were living under bridges like the French Revolution saying, I'm here to petition Congress for a loaf of bread. This is a bored middle class that has been fired up by a lot of crazy stuff on television and the internet and talk radio, into all the stars and the heroes of their own.
Yeah, yes, very, very well said. But you do have a whole bunch of lower income folks that are very angry, really angry. And I hate to generalize, but when Hillary Clinton called them deplorables, whatever it is, I have such a hard time, Tom, understanding the Trump voter, because I so often think if you can support that guy, you probably are like him. You're a bully, you're a sexist, racist asshole who will win. Most importantly to me, the most important characteristic is you're the kind of person who will do whatever it takes to win the game. You will cheat. You will do whatever it takes to get there. Shortcuts, anything unethical.
And purely just to screw the other guy, not because you're trying to get anything.
Cruelty is the point.
Cruelty is the point. Adam Serwer, great article. The cruelty is the point.
And I think book too now based on that. But
let's talk about that anger for a minute, because I come from a town like that. I mean, but where it happened in my town in the 60s and 70s. I mean, that deindustrial, I literally grew up looking out of my window at a smokestack that hadn't been used in 20 years before that. Like, it was just, they eventually had to tear it down so it wouldn't fall on anybody. And yeah, there's anger about why aren't we well, because things change over time, because that's the nature of it. Kevin Williamson is a lot more right wing than I am. Williamson, his answer to this, and I quote him in the book, he's a lot harder core than I am. He's like, yeah, you know what the answer to that is? A U-Haul. It's get in a truck and go somewhere else, which is what people used to do. do. If your town, if the jobs are gone, go get in a car, go where the jobs are. I think that's a little too tough on some folks. On the other hand, this didn't happen. And this is something I talk about in the book with nostalgia. People have got to get over the idea that this happened 5 years ago, that we couldn't see it come. Oh my God, like the factory closed, 2 days ago. Most of this deindustrialization and job movement happened 30 years ago. I talk in the book about the people in Ohio still talking about the closure of the big mill. People here are very mad because the mill closed. Yeah. And as I point out in the footnote, the mill closed in 1977. At some point, this becomes like campfire stories where you're sitting around saying, now remember, young warrior, to be angry about the mill that you never worked in, that your father didn't work in, that your grandfather once knew. And I'll say one other thing, and then I'm going to get off this soapbox. When I hear people talking about factory, they closed the factories and we want those jobs back. Whenever I hear that, I think that means you've never set foot in a factory.
Yeah.
If you're nostalgic for a factory job,
yep,
you've never been inside a factory. Most of the people talking about this would never work in those jobs because they were horrible. And I saw them up close, and all my friends and my family all worked in them. They all worked in the mills, in textiles, in paper, in chemicals. The whole point is not to end up having to do that.
All right. Well, let me take a quick break. I almost never do this, but today's show's a little unorthodox. I didn't get to do the news, and I do have to tell you about a really awesome product, service, app that I think you're going to like and utilize and thank me for later. It's certainly helped me because you've got something that you've been procrastinating about regarding your health, whether it be your ears. For me, it's my eyes right now. I need to get a checkup for my eyes. It could be your heart. It could be your mental health. There's a doctor that you probably should see. You should probably see a physician for that. I'm not saying you got some bump or skin issue that you've been procrastinating about, but maybe you do. Maybe you do. Either way, no matter what, if you're avoiding going to see the doctor, especially because of the pandemic, I just had to cancel my physical because I had something come up. I got to go do that. Your dental cleaning. If you haven't seen any doctor, and now that a lot of things are opening up in a lot of places, today is a time to catch up on your regular health care. And I'm here right now to tell you how to do that. Just download the free app ZocDoc, ZocDoc, the easiest way to find a great doctor and instantly book an appointment. With ZocDoc, you could search for local doctors, you could take your insurance, read verified patient reviews, book an appointment in person or video chat, which is pretty cool to be able to do with your favorite doctor that you find here. You never have to wait on hold with a receptionist. Whether you need a primary care physician, dentist, dermatologist, psychiatrist, eye doctor, or any other specialist, ZocDoc has you covered. Right now, I want you to go to ZocDoc.com/standup and download the app, the ZocDoc app, for free. Sign up for free every month. Millions of people are using ZocDoc, and I am one of them. It's my go-to whenever I need to see a doctor. So that's exactly what I've done. I found a new physician for a physical, also a new eye doctor that was closer to my house, both on ZocDoc, because ZocDoc makes healthcare easy and painless. Now is the time to prioritize your health. Go to ZocDoc.com/standup. Download the ZocDoc app to sign up for free and book a top-rated doctor. Many are available as soon as today. That's ZocDoc.com/standup. When you need a doctor, you need a doctor now, not in a few days, not in a few weeks, and definitely not in a few months. Don't wait. If you need a doc now, ASAP, we've got a solution. ZocDoc.com/standup. Okay. Thank you. And now back to my conversation with Tom Nichols. Let's get him back on that soapbox. So, by the way, I had you on to be on your soapbox, so there's no reason for you to step down. That's why it's my Tom Nichols I like best. But so The one example might be that's still remaining and very important to discuss. I'm not sure if you talk about it in your new book. I haven't gotten to it if you have, but coal mines. I mean, they are still important. We act about how they're dying and how they're not competitive and so on, but I'm less about the economics and more about it's the same thing you just said about the mill, the nostalgia for the coal mine, but the coal mine is dangerous to breathe and it can fall in on you. And if it does, they're not even going to make your family whole, and not to mention climate. But I feel like it's a really good example of what you're talking about that is still actually happening and people are still fighting for, including the last president, even though he did nothing.
No, and I don't come from a coal town, but I remember a conversation I had with my dad one day where he said he was talking about this kind of crappy job that one of the kids of his friends had to take for a while. And he said, he shook his head and he said, the whole point of us doing this is so that you don't have to do some of the awful things we did. And which doesn't mean that we're all going to be, brain surgeons. It just means we're not going to work in, dangerous places full of toxic chemicals and die at 55. And the thing about the coal mines, I understand the miners saying this was, I actually had a conversation when I was writing the book with someone who comes from a coal family in Appalachia. And she said, it was a real sense of identity. It was good money. It put a roof over the head. This was really important to like her grandfather, especially that his identity as a man. He did this hard work and he brought, and he did a hard work that help build steel for the nation, but if in 2021 you're saying, what I want from government? I want to make sure that when I'm gone, my kid has to go into a coal mine. There's something wrong there. And I think part of it is that those parents, they're not really that interested in their kids mining coal. They're interested in their kids not moving away from them and leaving them alone with nobody to take care of.
Which, by the way, goes back to one of the faults in Kevin Williamson's Just Get Up and Move, because family matters for health care and child care. And if we had better government regulations or maybe benefits.
And yet, Pete, we have to point this out. The very same people who say, well, I'm trapped, because I can't move because of health care. Well, what do you think about national health care? Oh, no, that's communism. I'm not doing that either. I mean, in a way, you're always in this catch-22 of, I quote this book called Dying of Whiteness, which was a really interesting book where this guy,
Metzel. Yeah, love him. Been on.
Yeah, Metzel, where he says, here's a guy saying, I've had years of hard living. I've ruined my liver. But if Obamacare is the only way I'm going to get a new liver, I'd rather die. Well, what do you say to that? I mean, okay, you win.
Well, what I say to it is it depends on how you ask that question about national health care. My good friend, Dr. Aaron Carroll, one of the smartest health policy experts in the country, says Medicare is as American as apple pie for Americans over 65. But for anybody under 65, it's socialism.
It's socialism. Exactly. I want keep the government out of my Medicare. As I point out in the book, and I raised this in Death of Expertise before, I still think one of the most stunning statistics there is how many people, there are millions of people in this country who don't know that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing. And you literally will have people saying, and I reached out to somebody who did some of this polling and I said, I just want to make sure, I'm actually understanding this. You literally have people saying, I want my congressman to overturn Obamacare and get rid of it, but I want him to keep the Affordable Care Act. Well, when you talk about anger, you can see where members of Congress will sit back and say, I don't know what to do with that anger because it is literally makes no sense.
Yeah, we can talk about members of Congress and who they are and how they got there. But so we talked a little bit economics and specifically, capitalism and your critique of that. What about religion?
Well, I have a weird relationship to American religion because I come from an old school religion. I'm Greek Orthodox. So for me, modern American Protestantism has always, I understand Catholics. They're kind of like our first cousins, but evangelicalism, Mormonism, Witnesses, all that kind of, new American religion has always been something of a mystery to me. What I think has happened is that religious self-identification, particularly among evangelicals, has just been another way of saying I'm rural and I'm white. Because what we found, for example, when you look at Trump voters who claim to be very religious, The Trumpiest voters are the ones who say they are evangelicals, but actually have very low rates of church attendance. That Trump voting behavior declines with more church attendance, which is kind of what you'd expect. I mean, it's kind of hard to go to church and the Bible and think about the New Testament and then say, and the way I'm going to show that faith is by voting for an adulterous casino boss, scammer, thief, and whatever he is. But I think that that religious identity has almost become just a way of kind of shortcut of saying, I'm from a small town and I'm white and I'm less educated. People are always shocked when I say, well, I'm a religious person. I go to church, but I'm not. But I think disservice to the debate about the role of religion in America that when we say American Christian, people instantly think evangelical.
Yeah,
a lot more of us out here than just.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But the reason they say that is because of the stranglehold they've had on the Republican Party for
that is true.
Years. Yes. And Sarah Posner writes about this. Catherine Stewart writes about it in The Power Worshippers, and of course, Jeff Charlotte has written about it
because they're organized. And this is the thing: there aren't that many of them, but they are super organized, and they are the most disciplined voters in the world. These people will show up and vote for dog catcher if there's a Republican in the race because they think they're fighting a big culture war. And that culture war goes all the way down to, the local assessor's office has to be a Republican. So you're absolutely right and it's what's interesting about this. When people get on my case about having been a Republican, people forget the Republicans stiff-armed the evangelicals for years. By 1984, the evangelicals were pissed at Ronald Reagan. And they really didn't like George Bush. I mean, they had to be convinced to come on board in 88 for Bush. When Bush, remember who wins the Iowa caucuses back in those days? Pat Robertson. I'm strange though it is to say, and Bush has to say, no, I'm one of you. I'm a Christian guy. But this takeover of the evangelicals really doesn't kind of pick up steam until coming into the 90s and the culture warriors and Cannon and the populists and Gingrich and all, and the Southernization of the party, which is what drove. I mean, I was a Massachusetts Republican. Ed Brooke was my senator. People say, well, it's a party full of extremists. I'm like, I grew up with Ed Brooke, African American moderate, being my Republican senator until I was 18 years old. And come on, but that changed.
That was 4,000 years ago.
Yes, it was. It was in the early Cenozoic period when Congress was still part of trilobites and seahorses. So yeah, it was a while back.
So, though, if you think about the religious right, and you think about COVID and vaccination and distrusting science, all these things that you've written and talked about, of course, and then you apply this other rule, which I'm so glad that you are talking about this and writing about this idea that you can't tell me what to do.
You're not the boss of me.
You're not the boss of me. And it's coming from often people who take orders on their haircut in the military or who take orders and live by a certain, quote, code of their God. And so it's so contradictory and hypocritical, but that doesn't mean anything to them. So talk to me about how your religiosity affects your support or belief into any authority or expertise and why that might be why you're not getting your vaccination.
I don't think it's about the religiosity. I think it's about the sense of cultural resentment. You can't tell me what to do because you're one of those professor guys. I tell this story in The Death of Expertise. My brother, who was a cop, and he owned a bar. He retired and he owned a bar because, as one does when one is a cop, you run a bar afterwards. And he ran it's a compliment to call it a bar. It was a joint. I mean, my brother ran a joint by the railroad tracks next to an empty factory. I'd go hang out with my brother when I was a young professor. I'd come down. I was teaching up in New Hampshire. I'd come down to Massachusetts. And one night I leave, and my brother just had to tell me the story later. He says, guy at the bar turns to my brother and he says, so your brother's a professor, huh? And goes, yeah. And seems like a good guy anyway. like instantly the professor is just a bad guy, right? And he's okay, he seems like a good guy anyway, like even though he's a professor. And I think what's happening is people with white coats. I mean, Limbaugh, you know, God have mercy on him. Limbaugh, before he died, was saying, "You people in white coats, you so-called experts in white coats." I don't know. It seems like Rush Limbaugh relied on a whole lot of guys in white coats for the last year of his life. But he was telling you, don't let them tell you what to do. Let me tell you what to do. And I think one of the things that really frosts me about the way this debate has been conducted, all those guys at Fox News talking about the experts and don't listen, don't let them be the boss, they're all vaccinated. They're all living in a vaccinated, you know, COVID-free bubble. This is a way spinning up the inner toddler in people. And I'm really glad that more and more people, you know, as you watch more programs and people talking about this, they're finally just coming out and saying, this is like dealing with toddlers. And I think it is the infantilization of American society that goes back to this problem that I talk about in the book, about narcissism, about abundance, about years of really not having, I know, you know, Pete, you're going to say there are people who are suffering and in poor towns, but even there, you know, you're still talking about people who are like, hey, I want to have ESPN. Like, I don't want to make hard choices. I want to live the way I want to live. And the government's job is to give that to me. And if people can't do that and they do anything that inconveniences me, telling me to get a shot, telling me I have to wear a mask, telling me that I have to, you know, get up and do things in the morning, then democracy is a failure.
Well, I agree with all that. And I think, you know, you could be as nuanced as you want to talk about those poor folks and be more specific about why that's the case. I think there's a lot of truth to that. But how do you solve for Norway without coming to my third point that I tried to make in our soundbite, everything that's wrong with cable news media earlier, which was capitalism, religion, and racism? How is it not just racism? And when I say Norway, I mean, they're super racist, but they're also very comfortable. Gender equity is a really important thing. But they don't have a lot of diversity. They don't have a pluralistic culture. And when they start to, a guy goes and kills like 100 kids on an island. I mean, there's certainly that part of that thread of there. But my point is they're very rich and there's not as much wealth inequality, and they are not us. They still understand, support institutions, democracy, science, and they're even getting rid, apparently, they're cutting down on their greatest natural resource, which is oil. They're doing.
Yeah, I mean, but you have to be careful about comparing, you know, tiny homogeneous countries like Norway to gigantic multicultural nations like the United States, and also because you know, there's a cultural issue. I mean, Norway has a different public and civic culture than we do. You know, there's an old joke. Do I have time to tell a joke?
I've got to go to break and get Tease Hannity. I'm not going anywhere. I'm in my fucking shed.
Well, there's an old joke about you know, in my days as a Soviet expert, you know, that the chief of the Soviet General Staff is worried about how are they going to fight China, right? You know, back when they were in trouble with China. And his aide says, well, you know, Comrade General, look at, you know, 2 million Israelis have held off 200 million Arabs. You know, it can be done. And this general thinks for a minute. He says, yes, good point. He says, do we have enough Jews? And so when you bring this up, you know, it's like, well, do we have enough Norwegians? That's not the point. The point is you have the culture you have. I think that I think a lot of this is white anxiety. And I think some of it is I'm going to even go further because I point this out in the book about culture. There's a certain amount of self-loathing in the culture among whites because they are participants in it. It's not like, I mean, they are, I'm surprised that more people haven't zeroed in on this in the book because I thought it would be more controversial. You know, 30 years ago, the New Republic had a great cover story called The Real Face of Rap. And it was this like, the cover was this white kid with blonde hair and a rugby shirt and freckles, you know? And I think there's this attitude of, you know, we've kind of brought this on ourselves that we have created a multicultural culture and we participated in it and we like it. And now we're feeling demographically threatened by it. And so we have to go scapegoat people. We have to scapegoat people of color. We have to scapegoat immigrants. We have to pretend that we didn't really, like living in it's kind of like the people who talk about the decadence of America while ignoring the, gigantic multi-gazillion dollar porn industry, right?
Drugs.
Or gambling. So, we're strapped as a country. I'm like, not to judge by sports and gambling, we're not strapped. We seem to have plenty of money for that.
Well, you could say that of all the black market activity, porn, gambling, sex.
But it's not black market. It's white market. It's legal.
And drugs, but it's also you're right. Obviously, that's getting counted to legalize gambling. But I'm talking about the illegal things, whether it be sex work or drugs, especially that people are spending. There's no way to chart how much they're spending.
But as I point out in the book, one of the only companies that can rival the reach of Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, all of these big Pornhub, a gigantic amount of traffic and a gigantic reach. Now, I don't say this as, crusader against porn. I'm simply pointing out when you're saying what's wrong with America? Why are we making, who did this to us? Well, I don't know. Who keeps making these stupid choices? Ask the consumers. Who keeps putting these, who keeps putting these people into office? Ask the voters. As if it's magic. Like we crossed the street one day and we got hit by a bus, and all of a sudden, Congress was full of lunatics, and sports betting was a multi-gazillion dollar industry, like it was magic, and nobody knows how it happened. It happened because we wanted it to happen.
Pornhub is a porn website. Is that what that is?
So I'm told.
Let me just putting down my notes. So why the phrase white anxiety? My black friends say they don't like that. They say it's called racism. Why do you use white?
Well, it is, but you don't have to use these terms exclusively, because there is a demographic anxiety among, and some of my colleagues at The Atlantic, like Ann Applebaum pointed out, and Yoni Applebaum as well, Ann wrote a book about the twilight of democracy, this sense, that people are losing power in the middle class in places like Italy. Yoni had a great piece about it's never happened before that the dominant group has just lost power through kind of demographic change. We've just not seen this happen, where white Christian America, and other people have written about it too. There's a book by Robert Jones and others, where white Christians are looking ahead to within their lifetime, or certainly within their children's lifetime, where they are merely a plurality rather than a majority of the country. And it freaks them out. And change freaks everybody out. I mean, I'm an old white guy. I when I get on the subway, I look around and I say, wow, this looks different than 1980. It doesn't bother me, but I notice it. It makes me aware of my age. But I think for some people, this has been weaponized by political entrepreneurs who say, this demographic change, the people that are coming up, they hate you. They're going to kill you. They're going to take things away from you. When in fact, and again, it appeals to that inner narcissism. You are so important. Think of it with the vaccines, right? You are so important that Bill Gates needs to get microchips into your bloodstream because he needs to know where you are. Like you matter that much. But that is the new dominant cultural ethos. I matter, and everyone's out to get me because I'm, the last defender of white Christian civilization in a way that people didn't think about 30 years ago.
One more question, Tom, and I could talk to you forever. The books are so good, and I hope that you're impressed enough to make a stop here again at some time in the future, because I'm really enjoying it. But, we talk so much about black on white, we talk about race and the original sin of America. And I wanted to I think immigration, there's an overlap there because it's what you talked about in terms of, kind of a xenophobic thing. But immigration is interesting because if you look at economics, and if you look at the special interest groups that, spend money on politicians, they're overwhelmingly in support. There's a wide disagreement that immigration is really good for the economy. Maybe there is, and maybe I'm missing something, but there is so much fear of folks coming in and working, and yet there's so much work apparently to be had. What about the issue of immigration, and how is that constantly an animating. And by the way, if only in 2013 the House would have taken up a vote on the Senate's that passed a comprehensive immigration bill, so there would be so much different paradigm here. But what about that issue?
Well, I'll go, this is where I'll do my old guy thing and say, and if we had actually taken seriously all the things we said we were going to do after the 1986 amnesty, which we're talking 35 years ago now. So, our immigration system's a mess. We are not competent at this, and we can't forge a bipartisan solution on it. But the Republicans used to be a pro-immigration party. America was a pro-immigration country. What's interesting, again, is because this has been weaponized as a racial issue, you have people in Montana and Iowa worrying about immigrants on the border of Texas because they're saying, people, what's your big fear up here in, voting in northern New Hampshire? Oh, it's illegal immigrants flooding into America. Do you know any? Are there any in your town? No. And so it's become a kind of a placeholder for issues about race. And it is absolutely true that a lot of the people who are coming in are doing things. This is the old saw about doing jobs Americans won't do. But the fact of the matter is, these are jobs. This is like, it goes back to what we're talking about with factories, right? I wish you know what they need to bring back to my town? Good chicken slaughtering jobs. Those were good, high paid jobs. No, I'm not doing it, and my kids aren't doing it, but somebody should do it in my town. And so I think that the immigration issue on which the Democrats have been completely tone deaf, and which the Republicans have racialized into, again, that we're talking about white anxiety. My hometown, talk to people from my hometown, they will, even though that most of the people my age that I went to high school with, they did well, they prospered. A lot of them didn't go to college. They didn't have to. They did. You know what they're really upset about? And I say this in the book, that the local barber shop is now a Spanish church. It just rubs them the wrong way. And I'm like, okay, but the WASPs who lived here 100 years before did not appreciate the Polish-speaking church, and the filthy garlic eaters, and the Greeks and their greasy mustaches setting up churches. This is part of how things change. And they're like, no, this is different. This has to. And I'm like, okay, then I notice you don't live in this neighborhood, because that's the other thing is all the guys from my old neighborhood who complain about the neighborhood don't live there anymore.
Yeah. Chicopee, right? Massachusetts.
Chicopee, Mass. Yeah.
All right, Tom, I'll let you go. Do you want to do one Jeopardy question?
Sure. Hit me.
This singer was homeless for the year before her big break, winning an amateur contest at the Apollo Theater in 1934.
Billie Holiday?
That's a great guess. Who is?
I don't know. I could start cycling through Blossom Dearie or
Ella Fitzgerald.
Oh, okay. Well, good one.
I just love to be able to play the role of the host where I tell you it's a good guess because there's always ripping. I would have known that.
I know you get that. Alex had that kind of. He once asked, do you guys think I make the contestants? We were at a contestant trial. He said, wait, you don't think I make the contestants feel stupid, do you? And we all we're all sitting there going,
yeah.
Bit, Alex.
Dude, it's so great to finally talk to you. I love.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
I hope everybody gets them. Our Own Worst Enemy is so good, and so Death of Expertise is so amazing. Such both important. I hope you'll join me again, and I'd love to have you at one of our live events. And really great to talk to you.
Thanks, Pete.
So, what did you think, huh? About the ad read, No, about Tom Nichols. But yeah, definitely go to ZocDoc.com/standup. Tom is great, right? At Radio Free Tom. I think you liked me. I think you liked our conversation. I hope that he will join me again soon. Okay, but now it's time to get to my second guest of the show. She is an old friend of mine, one of my oldest comic friends that I've known the longest. She is the author of a hilarious, awesome, poignant comedic memoir called Dead People Suck, about cancer, hospice, death, and grief, and funerals. And it's very, very good. And she is a stand-up comedian and Emmy-nominated writer. You can see her in California, in Southern California, Burbank, October 1st and 2nd, October 8th in Brooklyn, October 8th and 9th, also in New York at the Stand, in Austin, Texas, right after Thanksgiving, in Fort Collins, Colorado at the beginning of December, and New Year's Eve, you can see her in Vermont at Burlington Comedy Club. Ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with the always hilarious Laurie Kilmartin, Any Laurie 16 on Twitter, and of course her podcast, which is really good. It's a lot about comedy and so good because she does it with Jackie Cashin, and you got to listen to Laurie and Jackie on the Jackie and Laurie Show. Find it anywhere you get podcasts, JackieandLaurie.com. All right, here we go with the hilarious, brilliant, awesome, very cool former writer at Conan O'Brien for 11 years. Did I mention that? Ladies and gentlemen, Laurie Kilmartin. There she is, Laurie Kilmartin, one of my all-time favorite comedians and writers and people and Twitter persons. And I'm very happy to have you back on the podcast. And I really appreciate you joining me.
I'm happy too. You're one of my favorite people as well. And we had that crazy time in New York when we were both expecting babies, like right around the same time. And I'll never forget that.
Really? What is your recollection of that? I remember feeling a certain sense of solidarity because there was another comic who was having who were having a baby, but I just I couldn't find a lot of comfort because I like everybody had their own financial situation. That's what I was really thinking.
Yeah, totally. And mine was a surprise situation. Wasn't yours as well?
Yeah. Very.
No comic plans on having a child. That's who does that except for Gaffigan.
That's a good. I've never really thought that much about that. I bet you Tom Papa planned his kids.
Yes, yeah, but I think Cynthia had deliberately stepped back. You know what I mean?
His wife, a comedian, yeah. Because why is that? Why do comics not plan? And what's the difference between male and female comic? Like if you're a woman and you're a comedian and you get pregnant, there's not much you might not be able to work. I mean, you don't want to travel around all the time. I mean, there's a lot of complications there, I would imagine. It's
hard to work. Yeah. It's hard. You got to recover physically from pregnancy and childbirth and stuff. And, it's kind of now more a cool thing that people are into, but for a long time, it was like, oh, then you're not getting spots. You're showing, So, it was tougher. It was tough. It was weird, but it was exciting. Like you, me, I think Lisa Landry and Ben Bailey were all sort of in that situation at the same time. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I don't remember that. I definitely remember Lisa having a baby, but now, so your son is now 15, right?
He's almost 15. He'll be 15 in October.
Right. Yeah. And my daughter is 16. My other daughter is 14, but we don't talk about her. It seems like you're really close with your son. Like you guys spend a lot of time together, which at least it seems that way.
Yeah. I mean, well, we all of us parents became incredibly close to our children, right, during COVID and stuff. Yeah. So he went back to school this year. So he went back to school, and I've been unemployed for the first time in 11 years. And so like all day long, I have nothing that I have to do. I mean, there's plenty of things I should do, but it's a really strange feeling I've never had of just emptiness.
Yeah.
And it's something I always wanted, because you're so busy. You're like, I just want to have nothing that I have to do. And then when you have it, it's quite anxiety producing.
Yeah, for sure. For a lot of different reasons. But the job that you had for 11 years was writing on Conan's various show. Mm-hmm. And let's just talk. Can we talk about that? I always want to talk with you about that because He's one of my all-time favorites. You're one of my all-time favorites. What was that? What was that experience like? And how much of a full-time job was it for you? Because I think of that because when I worked at Colbert and at The Daily Show, they had so many weeks of hiatus. And while I was the warm-up comic, so I wasn't a full-time employee, but other people were full-time employees, but they had a lot of weeks off, which is good for you as a comic. Like, what kind of a job was that in terms of the time that you worked on?
Like day to day, it would be, we'd get in around 9 or 9:30 and then stay till somewhere between 5 and 7, So it wasn't terrible, but it was a lot of hours to be away from a kid for sure, all the afternoon hours. But, that's what a job is. And during hiatus weeks, I would go on the road as much as possible, go to New York or whatever. But I always tried to get out during hiatus week. So either my son would be with his dad or my mom lived with me for 4 years and she would take care of him. But I definitely had my little team that would help me leave town and stuff. So
what kind of things were you writing?
Oh, me on the show, mostly jokes, mostly monologue jokes. And I had sketches and stuff, but that was more there's like 2 teams. And so monologue people could pitch sketches, but we had less of a hit ratio with those,
Who looked down on who? So what?
Everyone contributes. No, I mean, here's the thing, like sketches live on forever, right? So you can watch a 15-year-old sketch and still laugh, but monologues only last like 20 hours. And then you're like, who, you could watch an old monologue and you'll have people going, who's Mitt Romney? Who's Paul? Like, they don't even know who the players are in the joke. So they don't really last. So it's, what we contribute is more giving the host something to say while he's talking to the audience, it's almost just like finger food.
What was it like? What was that experience like? I mean, it's one of the greatest shows and funniest people. And by pretty much all accounts I've heard, really nice guy. I met Conan once briefly. He was super nice. But I mean, I've heard nothing but good things about him. Is he a monster? Is he really behind the scenes? Is he?
That would be great.
Sexually assaulting everybody, men, women, kicking animals.
He's not a monster. He's very, very funny, and he loves to find your weakness and go after it. Which, if you're a comic, you kind of love. Yeah. Just to be roasted constantly. So he made us laugh a lot. And I've worked on other shows where the host didn't make me laugh ever.
Which one?
Now I'm not naming names, but he was great, and the show was structured in a way where no one could get ahead of anybody. So there's no point in backstabbing if that's your personality.
How do you create such a structure where there isn't that type of?
Well,
can you explain that? Or is it?
I guess the ideas, let's see, ideas get submitted to him without initials on them. So if he likes them, he just picks them blindly, so it's not, so I don't know. It kind of like, at least with jokes and stuff, it gave you a way to have a bad day or a bad week without wanting to kill yourself. I mean, you still kind of did, but you didn't feel like, oh my God, Conan knows I'm sucking today or whatever. It gave you, the writer, a little bit of protection, which takes the pressure off and then helps you kind of get back in your groove if you have fallen out of it, And I don't know, it was always just like there was writers and then there was a head writer, but I don't know that anyone ever wanted to be head writer because it's a lot more hours and it's less writing. It's more tweaking. It's a really different job, head comedy writer. So I don't know that any of our writers were like aching for that job ever. So yeah, it was just trying to get stuff on the air. I guess that's how people would be competitive. But also, if you helping with other people's stuff, they would help with your stuff. So even in that way, it wasn't like there wasn't that sort of nastiness that maybe can exist on other shows.
Yeah, I could imagine that's the case. I worked at again, not in that kind of a role, but I just remember the Colbert Report, the Daily Show. There was more negativity. I don't know if there's a lot. I don't know. There was just a lot. It was around longer, but I don't know. The tone that Stephen set for sure was really, everybody was very familial, and I would imagine Conan similar. Yeah,
I think so. I think Colbert has very similar working, philosophy, perhaps.
Speaking of which, what happened the other night at the Emmys so Colbert won, and then Conan went on stage and stood there the entire acceptance speech?
That's so cool. I think they invited him up or something. I mean, let's be honest. He should have won. He was nominated for Best Talk Show Host, I think, and he should have won. I mean, congrats to, John Oliver and stuff, and I understand why he won because he's great too, but, it was like Conan's last year for that. And because he's always on TBS, and before that he was on late night when late night sort of didn't count, when it was like the big guys are on at 11:30, and 12:30 is for the lunatics or the freaks. He was always like on the slot that didn't matter as much to the industry. And so even at TBS, that's, not as prestigious as being on NBC or something. So it was I don't know. I thought he should have got something for all of his years of being just on the outside of the popularity ring, making incredible stuff.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think I don't know who's the greatest. It's also subjective, but for me, it's always been between him and Colbert. But Conan's always made me laugh the hardest, I think. But so I just thought, I don't know, like those shows last year, so many of them were done remotely. I was like, who's the best at sitting at home and doing a very unorthodox thing? Although, I don't know, did Conan do something different? Were they all kind of, remote in one place for a long period of time?
I guess they were. I mean, Conan, like everyone at first, was at his house, and then he got back into a studio. We let the lease go on our studio at Warner Brothers. And just to go off on a side note, so like last December, we all were able to go into our offices and get our stuff, and our offices were attached to a gigantic studio that had the set, the audience chairs, and just the wardrobe department, the props department. It was like a giant little city inside a studio. Mm-hmm. And I opened the door to it, and it had been completely destroyed. And I like almost had a heart attack. It was so shocking to see. And it was just like, it wasn't like broken down. It was like pieces of wood everywhere. It was just like a bomb had dropped.
Now we're talking about your office or the set? I'm kidding.
The studio.
You'd be devastated if your office was damaged.
Oh,
that's tough.
They have to put Ellen's people somewhere.
That's tough. That must have been tough to see.
Yeah, it was crazy. Because we didn't get to our show. COVID kind of ended our show, and so we didn't get to. We just again, like probably a lot of people, we left in March of 2020, and it's like, all right, well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, I guess. We were about to go on hiatus anyway, so it felt like the hiatus would coincide with a very brief shutdown. And then we just never went back in, and we never had a show like that ever again. And so, I wish I had known that like that would be the last time I would be going to a monologue meeting. I wish I'd known these were all going to be the last times I would ever do that. But you don't usually get that in life anyway, so I guess it's okay. So Conan went to Largo, which is a theater in Los Angeles, and he started doing shows out of Largo with no audience. But we filled the seats with cardboard cutouts of fans. Like fans sent in their picture, and we made giant cutouts. Yeah, so he had faces to talk to. And then Andy would sit in the audience too. So there'd be one person. But yeah, that was, that's tough. It's when you're a live performer, it's tough. No one wants to just look directly to camera all the time,
Is it also true that Conan decided to call it quits because he wanted to make room for Fox News' Greg Gutfeld?
Greg needed a chance.
He's doing well. That show apparently is getting like a lot of viewers. I'm not surprised. I mean,
I'm not either. I mean, there, for every reaction, there's an equal and opposite, right? So Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you're a Trump fan and you like late night, there's not much late night you could enjoy, really.
But they say that not only women aren't funny, but conservatives aren't funny, at least as comedians. What do you think?
They're right about conservatives. I don't know who they say that about women, but they're right about conservatives. It's weird. Like I was at the Broadway recently, and I ran into a comic, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And their person's writing for Gutfeld.
Oh wow!
Which a job's a job, but it's not a union job. That's the thing that sucks. Is these guys, men and women that are writing for the show, should be getting union benefits. They should be getting health care, pension, all that kind of stuff that the Writers Guild affords writers and affords all other late night writers. Everyone that was nominated, gets these benefits. And these people, because it's Fox, I don't know how that can remain legal. I hope it doesn't. They should have full benefits.
I think they do that. I don't know what I'm talking about because it's cable or something. I don't know.
I don't know either, but what they're doing isn't news anymore. If you have written sketches and written,
I see what you mean, but yeah. Well, let me ask you about that because you're in unions, and there's I think I was reading on your Twitter feed, you were tweeting about. I didn't know about this if not for your Twitter feed, a current labor issue out there, and I just wanted to ask you in general, what are your thoughts about the being in unions and the benefits that you and other writers and performers have gotten, and what would it be like without them, especially in the entertainment industry or anywhere else?
Horrendous. I mean, the Writers Guild has a really strong union. I think it's the strongest of all the entertainment unions, and the health insurance. Like I had an aneurysm 2 years ago, and in my pelvis. And the stent was put in by UCLA, and the doctor's now like the head of vascular at Cornell. It's just like, the best person in the world. Like the healthcare is crazy good. Yeah, at the Writers Guild, and then there's like a pension, which as soon as we all heard Conan was going down, we all, every writer, you always feel like you're never getting hired again. So right. We go to the pension calculator. All right, if I can hang on 15 more years, I'll get a little allowance soon.
A pension. I wonder what that's like. Says me and most Americans. My insurance is
me too. That didn't occur to me because especially as a comic, I was like, I'm just going to, my pension is I'm going to be famous and successful, which didn't work out. But, so yeah, just the notion of having a pension feels like, that's something, not even my dad had, but that was that generation of auto workers. And the idea that, you can write these dumb little jokes and have a pension when you're elderly, like have income besides Social Security. It's crazy.
That's crazy that you had an aneurysm. I just looked it up while you're talking. If I had a similar issue for my procedure, my insurance is so shitty, I wouldn't get an actual doctor. They would just send a guy in, and he'd be like, "Listen, I'm not a doctor, but this is all your policy covers."
But I do listen to medical podcasts, so I think I know what I'm doing.
Well, everybody's a doctor now. Let's talk about some of that because I don't know. I find your tweets so important and pleasant and happy.
Pleasant.
Yeah, I do because you say things that nobody else will about death and COVID. And it's controversial and people can be offended or disagree, but I'll just say I'm always happy you said them. And
cool.
I'm like, somebody definitely needs to say this. And what people sometimes don't realize, I guess it kind of gives you cred, but your mom died of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like it gives me the moral authority to really.
What
my dog?
It's some, yes.
She's very upset by this topic. But let me just close the screen door for.
No worries. Go ahead.
So I really despise anti-vaxxers. I take joy when they die of COVID, especially, and when I mean anti, like people that are aggressively passing on misinformation. and then you read about these people that are just unvaccinated and they were scared, or they don't have an offensive Facebook presence where they're saying stuff about vaccines. They just, they just didn't think it would happen to them, and they were afraid, and there's a couple feeds, like one of them's like young and affected by COVID or something. And there's so many young parents dying. It's unbelievable, Yeah,
I saw a tweet of yours, like a sympathetic one, I think today or yesterday, about like another kid who's lost both parents, because like losing both parents is very uncommon at a young age. But because most of the things that kill a person aren't communicable. So your mom dies of cancer, your dad dies in a car accident or on a business trip. I don't know what your dad died, but the point is,
I don't know, but that's your third example, is these dangerous business trips. That's interesting.
Something happens. But the point is, these parents are giving the same exact, strain to each other. And, the other thing I'm just thinking out loud is they might have similar health issues. They might, both be having shitty diets. It's just, the whole thing lends itself to two adults dying at a young age at a time. It's terrible.
And now, in that one case, it was the family, all unvaccinated, decides to go to an outdoor fair in Moses Lake, Washington State, which is like, it's the rural parts of the western states are incredibly conservative. So Moses Lake is very rural. It's like eastern Washington. And I only know because I did one-nighters there back in the day. And but they all went to this fair, and that's where they got COVID in an outdoor situation. That's how contagious this thing is if you're not vaxxed. And the little girl got it too. Who knows what if she's gonna have any long-term effects? We don't know. But the two parents got it from her, and then they both died. And now this girl's been, the story that you're talking about, had just been sent to an aunt in San Diego. She's like 9 years old. Like, what? That was all unnecessary. Did not have to happen. This girl's life being traumatized like that,
Yeah, and there's got to be a lot more. That's the point. This has to be fairly common. It just doesn't necessarily, get reported in news media or by your friend's Facebook page. Do you categorize people? I mean, you just kind of did, but like so much of it is the anti-vaxxers, those who don't get vaccinated. I mean, we categorize all people because we're good people, but so many people are so misinformed is the way to argue it. But then I then come back on, well, they don't have to be. It's not like it's that hard to know who the experts are. I have a hard time at this point, this long in, having a lot of sympathy at all. And you talk to any doctors, they're done. They're just out. They're not, They don't want to keep risking their lives. Now there's a vaccine, it's preventable. It's not like other things that bring people into the hospital. It's awful. Do you in any way, have any patience for any type of person who hasn't gotten the vaccine?
I mean, again, if you're getting bad information and you're afraid, and if you're, the government hasn't done great things by minorities ever. So I can understand if you're a Black American and you're suspicious that, like historically, you should be suspicious, but so I understand that, but I wish that, whatever pastor someone's listening to would do the work and go, this is okay to take. It's necessary to take. Well, maybe they can't speak because they're in the ICU, these pastors. But I mean, my son's other grandmother is not vaccinated, and she lives in Texas, and she, doesn't think she feels she's afraid of the side effects, and her son and I have said things to her, but that, she's more afraid of potential side effects than she is of COVID, which, it should be the opposite, but I don't know. I don't want to, he might lose who knows? It's shocking. What
is the response at this point? At this point, you've got a really big Twitter following, and people, it's like your comedy. When people know who you are, they follow you for a reason, they come out to see you, they know kind of what to expect. Your Twitter followers know what to expect when it comes to a lot of different things, but that doesn't mean the jokes aren't always shockingly funny to me. I'm like, oh my God. That's why I started, that's my now reply for you and a couple of other comics, a little lowercase OMG, because I always go, oh my God. And then I laugh really hard because it's so fun. But what is the reaction? I mean, do people at this point say, you're terrible for these tweets, for saying these things, for not having any empathy? I mean, or are people just generally at this point like, another one. I love it.
Yeah, I think the people that follow, and I feel like some of my, do you ever like read some of your friends that are comics and go, oh, they're subtweeting me? You know, there's like a couple of comics that I think are like a lot more sympathetic because they perhaps themselves might be half anti-vax, but maybe they're vaccinated so they can get spots or something. And I feel like a friend of mine especially is like subtweeting me about being divisive, but I don't care.
Well, good. Is the comedy community now divided in any way that, you know, it's not like it's regulated or that there's polling, but it's fascinating to see some of the more recognizable names last week. Jim Brewer, you know, talking about not performing at places where they demand vaccination. And I don't know that maybe that's good for his ticket sales. I think that highly doubtful, because if you look at how many, like he's not, I think that's a bad idea for him at least. But what does the comedy community see it, and how do you see that idea? Oh, I'm going to be the anti-vax comedian, and those people are going to come love me.
Well, everyone I see is vaccinated because you have to be to get into clubs. I mean, maybe there's one or two clubs that aren't doing that out here, but most, like, is this a private chat? If I can type a name in here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This person is not vaccinated, which is really surprising to me. And there's a couple other people like, oh, that makes sense. I've seen their act. They're not that bright.
Did you type it? It didn't come through. Did you hit send?
I did.
Oh, shoot.
That's okay. I'll tell you later.
Oh, is it Gary Shandling?
He is not vaccinated against COVID-19.
Here it is. I found it. Oh, okay.
But and there's actually, and other people as well. But I'm like, okay, you know, and there's also from the left side of the spectrum, there's the yoga, I'm healthy types that are also not vaccinated, you know? So it's weird. And not everyone that's unvaccinated is a right winger. Some of them, you know, take a lot of vitamins.
Yeah. What do you say to that? People who are like, listen, I'm really healthy. I'm in great shape. I'm just not worried about it.
I don't know what to say. I mean, it's that I read a story a day on my COVID lists of people that are healthy that died of COVID. You know, people, there's some I remember there's like a weightlifter, a swimmer, an Olympian. I think she's Australian, double vaxxed, got COVID and is hospitalized. So it can even, you know, like that's really surprising. But,
the idea, the way I see it is if you're really healthy, you're far more likely to be able to survive it. Although you might not, you might die. But but it doesn't mean you can't give it to other people, you fucking asshole.
Also, you survive it like how? Like, are you going to have diminished lung capacity for the rest of your life? Because like everything I've read, I've done my research, Pete. But COVID attacks different parts of your bodies
in
different ways. It goes after, you know, it doesn't just go after your lungs. For other people, it goes after, you know, other parts of their body.
Yeah, did you not hear the phrase lingers in the penis this week? If that doesn't motivate some men, like no one wants, you don't even want an erection lingering. You don't want anything lingering. Not a memory, not COVID, nothing should linger in your dick is where
you want penises to linger, but you don't want anything lingering in a penis.
Well, now you're using words differently. That's not what we're saying. Yes. Like, you don't want all penises to linger, do you?
No, not all of them.
You could do without that one for a while.
A consensual penis could linger if it felt like it.
Yeah, it's just so, I mean, I don't know. I feel like someone like Joe Rogan and all these like fight guys and workout guys that have been talking about and taking supplements long before even about being sick. It was just about like bulking up or being more muscular, whatever. And it's almost all bullshit. And none of that stuff is regulated by the FDA. Yeah. And, you know, most people still think sugar makes their kids hyperactive. Like none of these supplements are proven to have worked. And they think, oh, I'll just take zinc. Like what? No, that's not a thing.
I know. And the list of things he took. By the way, I read, I don't know, he might be vaxxed. Who knows? Right? Like, I don't know that I believe him, but because he makes more money being unvaxxed.
That's crazy. Yeah. Do you think that that's true of like Brewer and other communities? Will they make more money by being anti-vax or unvaccinated?
Totally. I mean, Tucker Carlson is vaccinated because he works inside the Fox studio. So, I mean, you those guys all have to be vaccinated, but they get more viewers. I think Tucker Carlson is losing money for Fox because he doesn't have any advertisers, but he gets more viewers because he's vaccine skeptical for sure.
I wasn't sure. I thought he was doing his show from the center of the Earth's core, but maybe he's in studio. I don't know.
He sleeps at night, but yeah. Point taken. Yeah.
So where do you think we're at with COVID? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
We know at some point all the unvaccinated people will die and we'll just be left, right? I don't know what the end of the tunnel is. I mean, I guess you got to hope it turns into what the Spanish flu turned into, or the 1918 flu, which was just a regular flu. And then I feel like these are going to come, you know how, 50 years ago, there'd be a flood and they'd be like, this is a once every 100-year flood, right? And now we have those like every year, right? And I think because of climate change, and I don't know if I'm tying this together right, and I'm not a scientist, but I feel like I've read that there will be more instances of viruses like this.
Yeah,
and because of how we travel and stuff, that there can be another pandemic in 10 years or something. So we should put in a structure to squash it now. And of course, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think it has to do with temperature changes and being the perfect actual climate for viruses to spread and mosquitoes to be in places where they didn't used to be, and then turn into giant hornet mosquitoes.
Oh God!
with sparrows' wings, and
why did we have children? Honestly, why did we drag more people into this, Pete?
Well, it's a question that new parents are asking. I was talking to a guy who's a listener and friend who is talking with his wife about not having kids specifically because of climate. Because I think you can look at other things in the world and think, well, that could change, like authoritarianism versus democracy, or fascism or whatever, but that could change, or at least we could survive under that or something. But yeah, and now I don't know, have you ever said to your son? I've never said to my daughters, don't have kids. I would feel it feels so wrong, but I kind of want to be like, you should think about maybe adopting if you want to be a mom, because this shit's crazy with climate specifically.
Right. I think I want to get my son a vasectomy for his birthday one day. Like, I mean, not that I don't want him to have kids, but I've already told him, it's really hard. It's really expensive. And you don't want to have a child accidentally, even though I had you accidentally, but I was old. I was like 41 when I had my kids. So, right. It was different. He didn't crush my dreams. The industry did. But mine's more of a feeling of, you want to be able to, he wants to be an animator. So if you have to pay for a kid, that's really hard to have your starving years.
Well, I think that might be true, Laura, of almost every job except for like teacher at this point. Yeah, you want to be that's going to be hard to live on that. And now we're talking about like almost like traditional, like journalism. Yeah, that's not a job anymore so much. You gotta find your own way. Yeah, it's nuts. It's crazy to think about our kids having kids or considering not having kids because of the planet's climate.
Yeah. And and the ability to make a living,
Right.
And
well, the economy too.
At
Yeah.
least in the United States, we don't have a government that really gives anybody universal income. That would be just like a nice floor. Like you can't fall beneath this amount.
It's interesting. This child tax credit that they put out is amazing, and it's cutting child poverty in half. It's giving parents like a few $100 a month. It's huge. Other countries have been doing it for years, but it's so massive, and it's going to have such a positive impact. And yet it'll either be rolled back or that's the end of it. That's as good as it's going to get. Hopefully I'm wrong, and we'll see this kind of change, but it would be so much better for our kids' generation if they have these types of benefits that, frankly, we didn't have and had a struggle to worry about, especially if you want to be any kind of independent contractor and still have health. I know.
Yeah, I mean, I got my citizenship in Luxembourg, and I'm ready to drop everything and go to Europe.
Why Luxembourg?
Well, I had a great-great-grandmother who was born there, and they let us because of some loopholes. Luxembourg was forced to let some Americans descended from a certain group of Luxembourgers reclaim their citizenship.
Are they called Luxembourgers?
Yes, we're called Luxembourgers.
Oh, forgive me. I did not realize you were a Luxembourger up until now. Or maybe I knew that. But doesn't they have like 7? Isn't it the smallest country in the world? Isn't it like 7 people and you?
It's 7 other Americans. It's a small country. It's landlocked. It's between France, Germany, and Belgium. It's just a little tiny, but it's incredibly beautiful. It's a little country of mountains and castles. And I encourage people to visit when they go to Europe. It doesn't get all the fanfare of Italy with, but it's got cool stuff too. Okay. It's got these incredible tunnels that people lived in during World War II when they were hiding from the Germans. And so it's a beautiful country. And I can't believe my sovereign is Grand Duke Henri. I don't know. Yeah, I guess you're still beholden to a president, but I'm beholden to royalty.
Are you single? Because this is sounding really attractive to me. The whole time you're talking, I was like, how can I get to Luxembourg?
Sure, yeah. So, I
mean, you should use that. If you are single, Laurie, you should definitely use that on like date 3. Just kind of drop that. Like, if shit goes, bad, I can always go to Luxembourg and, I could take somebody with me. Anyway.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, sure. I think it's harder for, again, I have Luxembourg blood like you don't. So I have the blood of the Luxembourgers in me. So it gives me an edge.
I also always love to talk about, read about, and get your thoughts. I love when you and Jackie on your podcast, always talking about comedy and gender stuff. And you seem to really, I know you are like so always adapting at the latest cultural trends in terms of gender and sexual identity as it comes through the lens of comedy as well. And I think that's an important place to learn about how all of these new gender identities and structures, how we understand them through comedy, because people talk about it on stage. And if you're there watching, you become friends with them. But, what's changing with all of that in comedy? What are you seeing more? This type of comic, that type of comic, talking about their sexual identity, their gender identity. It must be a really fascinating time. I'm not really out there in the clubs, obviously.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty cool. I don't know how you could be on a show with a trans comic and then do anti-trans material. Like, I can understand like dumb jokes from, there's like a certain line of thinking from the 90s where it'll never change. But then there's, people that are just like, although I guess that's more of a podcast sentiment, like Rogan will go all in on, trans women MMA fighter. Like, it's just such a minor subset, whatever. It's just so dumb. But yeah, I think the more voices, the better. It makes the show more interesting. I love it when someone goes up on stage and they talk about their life. and they make jokes about their life, and their life is different from mine. I love it when it's like mine as well. I'm like, as an audience member, I'd love to hear from a single mom also, but I also love to hear from people that have nothing in common with me, and it make me laugh. I don't know.
Do you miss the old days coming up in New York when it was all mostly straight white comics? And you?
I do, because I love hearing about people's wives, and how hateful they are. I do miss hearing about how hateful everyone's wives are.
It's so funny.
There's a lot of like a lot of the wives are talking back, which I don't approve of, and.
What has changed? It's hard to know for me, and you're always going to point out, the bad things, which you should. But are things better for women in show business as a result of the last few years, the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement? There was kind of a movement within a movement in the entertainment industry, and then there's one within the entertainment industry, I think, with comedy. How would you describe the opportunities for women?
I think it's gotten a lot better for young, attractive women, and that's the first step. Meaning
they're still getting a lot of opportunities and harassed less? I don't know.
It's more. We're going to work more women who are 34 and conventionally attractive. So I appreciate that commitment, and let's just broaden it a little bit. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, in terms of comedy itself, like lineups, are there, generally speaking, are they making an effort? You can see on a lineup who is getting an opportunity pretty easily. And that depends on the person booking the show and the venue. Yeah. And then if you want to take all of the sensitivity out of it, it depends on, how that person thinks they're going to make the most money, get the most people to come, I suppose. Recently, there was a show that had, I think, women on it. It was promoted. It was something like Men Aren't Funny was the name of the show. I saw
that. Oh, yeah. We talked about that this week. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I heard that on your podcast. I thought and you guys were talking about how there was there's a moth. How there's a moth in my studio. How did that get in here? You guys were talking about how there was a negative reaction to that. I mean, it was obviously a funny thing.
Yeah, a bunch of guy comics started making fun of it, the flyer. And I don't know, I just was like, why? Like, if you look at, the lineups in Los Angeles, they're still like 80% male, even though they're, you could do 50-50 and have great comics on every show. There's so many funny women in LA. So, the fact that somebody's going out of their way to make a show for women, and they're naming it after it's a parody, I guess, of Christopher Hitchens' Vanity Fair article that said women are funny. I don't know, it was just unnecessarily mean, and like, dude, look at the shows you're on. There's hardly any women on the shows. Are you saying anything? Are you telling the booker, hey, there should be more women on this show? You're not. I know you're not. No comic is trying to, book themselves off of shows. So why go out of your way to make fun of somebody who is trying to just create stage time? Because that's the only way to get better, is to get stage time. It's stage time is piano practice. It's training. That's what it is. And so we have to do it in front of an audience. We have to do it in a show. So if a couple of women are putting together, are trying to figure out a way to get people to come to a show, and this works, and it did, the first time they did it, before they were retweeted, it sold out. And I think because of the backlash to the negativity, the second one also sold out. So it kind of worked out okay, but it's just like, why? I don't understand it.
All right. I realize how much time we've been talking. Let me let you go, Laurie. I love talking to you. But before I let you go, I like to end whenever possible with a nice thing, a compliment. You're one of the most thoughtful people I know, much less comedians. That doesn't happen. And I know that at this point, you have done a lot for so many other younger comedians coming up. You've been a mentor. You've created opportunities. You've opened the doors. You've given advice. You've always been a good person like that. So I wanted to ask you, Who's done that for you? Who is somebody that maybe we don't know, like a really thoughtful comic? Because you guys also do this great thing on your podcast where you highlight a comedian every week, which I think is very, very cool. But I was wondering if there's somebody that you could talk to us about that, like, kind of was a veteran as you were coming up that looked out for you, or even now does that kind of thing.
I would, do you know Ross Bennett? You know Ross,
yeah,
right?
I love Ross Bennett.
He was great. He was very positive and about my joke writing and stuff like that, and very helpful. And we'd always try to work together. He was great to me. Especially on the road, there was a lot of creeps too. So he wasn't. So he stood out that way.
Yeah.
And, no, he was very helpful. And then, this sounds, but I'm not working for him anymore. But Conan was amazingly helpful and giving me a job at the time that he did and stuff like that. That really saved my ass, and also just saved it, financially, but also creatively put me on a different path. Once you start having to write 30, 40 jokes a day, it changes your brain.
Yeah, for sure.
That really was amazing.
Those are awesome answers. That just made me think of one more, though, which is, was there ever somebody, a celebrity guest that was on Conan that you actually insisted on meeting or really wanted to meet?
Just two.
All right.
Carol Burnett.
Oh.
And I was allowed to go into her dressing room, and I immediately just started sobbing.
You did? Really?
I couldn't talk. She's got her arm around me, and I feel like a lot of women my age, she means so much to us that people just start crying when they see her, which is horrible. I'm mortified still.
That's how I feel when I see Louis C.K.
In terms of masturbating, he is a hero to a lot of young comics and himself. I understand that. And then the other was Chrissy Hind from the Pretenders. Oh, your Harry Harvey Weinstein plant. That's so cute.
Oh, yes, forgive me. I confused Louis and Harvey. I held up a plant.
I knew what you were doing.
I ruined the whole thing with my joke. Sorry, who is the second person?
Chrissy Hind from the Pretenders.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Why?
I love the Pretenders. That was like the first song I ever heard someone say fuck on was Precious by the Pretenders. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, that's funny. That's really interesting.
And I loved it. And I played it over and over again. And but I think again, she gets this, I'm like, all women my age feel like this about her, like a subset of us, right?
Right.
And we're all saying the same thing to her. So I listened to her new album. I just picked a track on it I loved, and I said, I love this song. And she was I think she was a little more open to me because I wasn't saying I love your 40-year-old work. I was like, I love this one that you just did. That's smart. I genuinely did. So it was no big deal. And so then she signed an album for me, which was pretty cool.
That's awesome. I remember standing next to John Grisham and I started telling him that I liked his books. I named the titles. And on the third one, I just slinked away. I realized what was happening. I was like, I can't even believe I'm doing it. And then I just turned around and walked away. I was so humiliated with myself.
That's a note for any audience member that could meet someone they're a fan of.
Yeah.
Cite their most recent work.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Don't mention the previous shit.
Yeah, it was like A Time to Kill was really one of my favorites. It's like I wrote that.
They're still out there.
Like I wrote that 47 years ago. Laurie, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. Hey, do you have, and I would include it in the show notes, that picture of you and Carol Burnett? Could I share that, or is it private? Do you have it?
I'll look for it. I know I have it someplace.
I figured it was framed up somewhere, easy to grab. But
it should be. That's a great idea. Yeah. I just have makeup dripping down my face, so it's not a great shot of me. So I don't know why I put it up, but it'll be the only one I have of her, so I should put it someplace.
That's awesome. I would love. Yeah, if you have that, no worries if you don't. I just think as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, I want to see that. Okay, I will do all the plugs on the way out and in the show notes, and I really appreciate talking to you, and I hope that we can do it again before your new album comes out, which is at the end of October. I wouldn't, look, happy to talk to you as much as you want to promote the album. Are you excited about that?
I'm For me, I think a lot of comics, you're like, by the time you record the album, you're so fucking tired of these jokes, you've spent many years perfecting them in some cases. So, I guess I'm glad to get it out.
Does it have a name yet?
It's called Corset, and I'm wearing a corset on the cover. So, and I have a lot of makeup on. I look way better than I do right now on your podcast. I
don't know how that's possible. I can't wait. I can't wait for that and to talk to you again before that. And congrats. And I am always excited what you're going to do next, including your next tweet. So let's go. Let's get to work.
Thanks, Pete.
There you go, Laurie Kilmartin, everybody. Any Laurie 16 on Twitter, listener podcast, Jackie and Laurie show, and tell you heard her right here on Stand Up For Me, as well as Tom Nichols at Radio Free Tom. Don't forget to check out ZocDoc.com/standup. That's our sponsor today. Again, apologies for not getting the news done this week, but I still do more than almost every podcast, daily podcast out there, all on my own. Sometimes I just can't make it happen. Today was one of those times. Please forgive me. Don't cancel your subscription. I'm very happy to have you listening to the show. Tell your friends. All right, that's it. I'm going to go post this baby up for you to all listen to. And now it's time for our own Emmy Award-winning singer-songwriter, John Carroll. Sing us out with Stand Up. See you tonight at the Hangout, everybody.
You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand